Not everyone needs to have a hot take on abortion. The things that people would find interesting about you in a conversation, talk more about that. Small crowds are harder than big crowds. People ask, like, what's the biggest crowd you ever performed in front of? I'm like, 20,000 people? Just because someone kills the hardest doesn't mean they're going to be the most memorable. If you cut all the fat off of something, it's just a joke, and then you don't need to be there. They could have read the tweet.
J.F. Harris.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. I'm in your room.
You have been doing comedy for more than 20 years.
Yeah, I started when I was 20 years old, and I'm 41, so I've been doing it longer than I haven't been doing it.
You could have a kid that goes to college right now.
Yeah, if I had a child, they would probably be graduating. Yeah.
Wow.
Or if it's my kid, they probably would have dropped out a couple years ago.
21 years in comedy. Do you have one advice that you would say it's timeless? It would work 20 years before and it still works today.
If you're just starting stand-up, I think the most important thing is don't do what you like. You're an impression of what you think stand-up comedy is. So many young comics, when you see them starting, they do what they think is like what they're like, what they think they're supposed to do for stand-up, and then it's them like trying to tell these jokes that are like horrible. Instead of just being themselves, because they're probably a much more interesting person,
Yeah, they're imitating a bit.
Yeah, they're imitating comedy, and it's just kind of like whatever. It's usually bad. It's usually like racist. It's usually misogynistic. It's usually like these kind of weird premises where like you're 15 minutes into a bit with no punchlines, and you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? For the beginning, just stick to like yourself. Your life, your parents, your family, where you're from, the things that people would find interesting about you in a conversation, things people ask you more questions about from your normal life, talk more about that versus like, here's my hot take on sponges or racism.
Sponges? I've seen, there was a bit about parrots.
Yeah.
Parrots. That was relatively weird to say. It was getting somewhere, but
yeah.
When would you say that, okay, I'm ready to transition from more like my personal stories to talk about maybe things like politics?
Well, I would only suggest talking about that stuff if that's stuff you're already interested in. You know what I mean? Like if it's something that you would have a conversation about in your day-to-day life, and it's something you think about a lot, then talk about it. But if it's not like a thing, like not everyone needs to have a hot take on abortion. Like if it's not something that you're like very passionate about and aren't informed about, you should probably just shut the fuck up. And that's on most things. Like if you're a person who loves Star Wars, then talk all about Star Wars on stage. Like that's what you're passionate about, because the things you care about tend to translate when it comes on stage. Like if you don't give a shit about the thing you're actually talking about, it becomes very obvious, I
have seen comedians making a joke based on the premise that it's even false.
And an audience can kind of tell. And unless they feel like you're doing like a whole character thing, it's going to read as disingenuous, and then they're just going to be out on you.
No, yeah, for sure.
Comedy is like sex. The person has to trust you to finish, which is to laugh,
I thought you'd say something else.
Yeah.
When you started with the comedies like sex.
Yeah, but
you force it on people? Yes.
No.
By the way, since you mentioned character, it's not on my notes, but I would like your take on that. How do you feel about character comedy on a stand-up night?
If someone's like, I'm just going to go up and be like, do like what would be in my SNL audition kind of thing, I think that's fine if like, it's a comedy show. So if someone's a person who does characters, that's great. Like, but then they're like clearly going for a character and like trying to do a character thing. But I've seen it like backfire pretty horrendously before.
What I find is I've seen it on stage a few times, and I think I've only seen it working once, and it was because that specific person a really new character. They worked on their character, they knew character, they were really good at it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're, especially in cities like Chicago or New York, where there's like big improv and sketch comedy scenes, you see a bit more of that stuff. Less so in like Los Angeles, but you do. There's guys like Fahim Anwar, who does this character like Lance Kanstopoulos, which is just like a funny like guy who like dances. And I played with a little bit of that stuff when I was like early in comedy.
So you mentioned the US, and that was part of my question. I have asked comedians before differences between the US and the European comedy scene.
I would say even in Europe, the difference between city to city in Europe, the scenes can be drastically different. So like to compare all of Europe versus like America is a bit more homogenized, where comedy is kind of, you know, traditional club stuff or like the bar old stuff. But like here, it feels like every scene kind of functions a little bit differently.
Do you have an example?
I mean, if you're doing stand-up in England, you're going to have a more traditional club show with 3-act breaks and stuff like that. And then if you're in France, most of the shows are like an hour long.
Yeah.
They're like much shorter. There's no break. I mean, just the differences in people is also a big thing. Like the topics you would talk about. I mean, I don't really change my act when I come here.
Okay.
I keep it pretty much the same because I feel like most of the stuff I talk about is pretty universal. But here you could have somebody who's from Estonia on a lineup talking like about what it's to be from Estonia. You can have someone from Portugal. You can have an English comic. You can have a comic from India. It's much more diverse here. I feel like where in America there's some diversity, but it's like you got like 4 types of people. But at the end of the day, for the most part, everyone's pretty much American.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like there might be some pigment diversity, but deep down we're all Americans, are all pretty similar, and we all share one kind of culture, where if you feel like here is much more of a melting pot. So on a lineup, you're going to get a much more interesting audience of people. I had an American friend watch the show that we were at the other night, the one I headlined at your place, and she said the thing she found most interesting watching it was sometimes the audience would laugh at something, like a big laugh that she just didn't know what the heck they were talking about, because it was like a cultural reference to something very European or Eastern European. And it's funny, but like you come here long enough and do stand up in Europe long enough, you'll learn more about the world, where like in America, you'll learn more about America.
That's a very good take. 12 points for you.
Hell yeah. That means 2.
12.
Oh, that means 12.
It's a Eurovision reference.
Ah, gotcha. We don't get it. But what I do watch is The Voice Global. I watch a lot of that. So I know the French, German, like Nordic, Australian, all those. I got time to kill at night. That's pretty much what happens between 2 in the morning and 4 in the morning as a comedian. You go home, you're like, okay, I got to finish a little bit of work. So I'm going to edit some videos, do that. It's 2:00. And then you got to wind down. And then you're watching The Voice Global, tearing up at King Judah, singing a song. You're just like, oh man, this kid.
You're an artistic soul, though. I like that.
Oh yeah. I consider myself an artist.
You should. For me, comedy is art.
Yeah.
And whoever says differently, I'm like, you just don't do it right.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's both art and a craft.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And there are some people who practice it purely as craft, and there are some people who meld the two together. Yeah. But I think when you are just trying to do your impression of what comedy is, that's when it's craft. And when you're trying to talk about yourself and the world and life and like emotion and giving things context, and that's when it becomes art.
And innovate a bit as well.
Yeah.
2 questions. One, I have a practical question. How would you give like practical advice on how to deal with a small crowd?
Small crowds are harder than big crowds. Like I've performed, it's funny when people ask like, what's the biggest crowd you ever performed in front of? I'm like 20,000 people. Yeah. Or maybe more, maybe 22 or 23, but like in that range. But that's easier because they paid a lot of money to be there. They're all facing the right direction. There's giant screens. You're on a giant stage. You're in a giant room. So they're like pumped up for comedy. Where like 4 people, it kind of goes back to that, like, or 8 people or whatever. I've performed in front of 1 person.
Me too, actually.
Yeah. But like the smaller the crowd, it's that similar thing of you have to act like it's normal. You know what I mean? Like some comics will go up there. And also it's like stand-up's a conversational art form. And when you're performing, when it's 8 people and people go up and they just like rattle off their act and like stand there stiffly and act like it's 100 people, it's weird. It makes more sense to just address that it's like, we could have done this show in my living room. And they'll laugh and they're aware that you're aware, and then make it more conversational, because when stand-up is more conversational, it's better anyway. So it's that similar thing of like, you just got to set them at ease. Like, we're all aware that like we're in a half empty or more than half empty room. I think it's just, you know, you don't have to be like ashamed of it, and you don't have to like try to act like it doesn't go well when you put up a self-defense. You know, you have to be able to just be like, isn't this fucking weird? We're still going to have fun.
That's what I tell them.
Yeah.
I'm like, look, give a bit of good energy, and trust me, we are actually going to have a good show.
Yeah.
And
yeah, some of my favorite shows I've ever had have been like, you know, you go to a club and it's the Sunday and there's like 15 people or 10 people or something like that. Because, you know, like early on, or because also when there's 8 people at a show for a comedian, the stakes are pretty low. So it's like, you know, but you can tend, like for me, I like doing small rooms and small shows because it's like, I don't feel like I have to kill, and that allows me to be more free. And then I tend to actually do better.
that's so true though. When you feel more liberated, you tend to do better.
Yeah.
In general, that's very true.
Yeah. And then, and like most shows, I tend to just think of it like, this is our show kind of thing, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's like, here's our show for these 8 people. Never going to see them again. Like, let's make it at least fun and interesting so that we all feel like we had a cool most shows I try to do that. Just make it be like, we're only doing one of these. Sometimes you do 20 people, 30 people, and they just kind of suck. And you're just like, this feels like work. And sometimes it's 5, 8 people who are just down, and you're like, oh, this feels like play.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between good and bad comedy. Like when you're starting out in comedy, you can make it awkward and you can do poorly. But the further in you get, at a certain point, you kind of realize sometimes it's just not a good crowd, and there's nothing, and you can like try to bring them over to the bright side and like have fun. And there's like different ways of like pushing and prodding them and like letting them know that they're safe and this could be good and all those things. But at a certain point, if they don't want to come along and they're just going to be mid, like there's nothing you can do about a bad crowd sometimes. And you can just be like, all right, if you guys are going to phone it in, I'll phone it in too. I'll tell jokes that I know work and we won't have a good time.
It's true. You lose because I think every time I start a show, I'm thinking I want to give these people the best possible time.
Yeah.
But if these people seem to not be willing to have a good time after you tried the few tricks, you start thinking, why should I kill myself at this point? And
that also, sometimes when you're just like, I'm not going to bend over backwards for you guys, and you have that energy, they sense that and they're just like, oh, this guy doesn't care. And that makes them trust you more a little bit. So sometimes just having that, like, it's fine. I'm doing 2 more of these tonight. And that's with all comedy. Like every show is just practice for the next one.
Bill Burr's company produced our
special.
Our special. And you've met Bill Burr.
Yeah. I did he also had a TV show on Comedy Central that I did.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my first television taping, was that.
How's this experience?
It was great. Yeah, it was, I think they did there were 3 comics an episode, and I think they filmed it in 2 days. So they filmed 4 episodes a night. And we all just went up. I was in the second night and towards the back end. There's this great American comedian who's super funny named Jay Larson, who was the producer who facilitated and kind of hosted the show and kept the energy up. And Bill closed all the shows so there would be an audience. And then, 12 of us went up and we taped, and then they cut the 3 to an episode and then put those out.
It's so cool.
Yeah. And we like all spent a day and like sat down and had an interview with Bill. And that's like the show opens with like him interviewing us, and then a 4.5 minute, 5 minute stand up set that was 7 minutes that they like cut down.
Okay, that's so cool.
Yeah.
How does it feel like to meet a name like?
I mean, the longer you do, Bill's just a normal ass dude. Like he's just a normal dude who's good, really good at comedy, and has like a good sense of like right and wrong, a central compass, and is just like a nice person. And the more you do stand up and the more like famous comedians you meet, the more you realize like, oh, these are just comics. Like I've been doing it for 21 years. Like some of the people I started with are like very famous now. And some like were famous and aren't famous. And some were like famous when I met them, got less famous, got famous again. Like they're just people. Like, so it's like Bill's great at stand up. Like he's made me laugh so much, but he's also like just a guy. And normally when I see him or talk to him, he's like one of those people, like people are always at, so I just don't talk to him about stand up. I just talk to him like, how's your life kind of stuff.
Like that's the beauty of stand up. You meet people, I think, through stand up.
Yeah.
Then you can actually have personal conversations and even be friends with them, or at least good acquaintances with them.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. It's this funny thing. I feel like, a lot of times you come up in the trenches with people, and those are the people you kind of like talk about jokes with. You talk about like how Instagram works. How do you get people to shows? Like a lot of your peers, you kind of talk about that stuff. And then like at a certain point, they like, I don't know. I feel like you have your like work acquaintances, and then like of all stand-ups, like usually like 3 or 4 out of the thousands, become like your actual real friends who like know about your life. Comedy's nice because it's one of those things of like, no matter where you are in the world, you have community.
Yeah, exactly.
You can kind of just show up, and if you're like not a crazy person and decent at comedy, anywhere in the world, you can kind of instantly make friends.
I get the feeling, and I might be very wrong, but I get a feeling on some shows from the reaction the audience has after the show and the feedback audience gives after the show, that sometimes the favorite comedian of the audience is not the one who got the biggest or the loudest laughs.
1,000%. 100%. I totally agree. Just because someone kills the hardest doesn't mean they're going to be the most memorable. Here's an example. Sometimes I will do shows on the road, and I can remember the first time this ever happened to me was the Punchline Comedy Club in Atlanta, which is one of my favorite clubs. I did a Saturday early show and a Saturday late show. There were about the same amount of people, like 300 people in the audience. The early show, I had a great set. It was when I was getting ready to run my special. So I was trying to be like word perfect, nail everything, just like hit it. And I did it on the early show, got everything like, just like joke, word for word, whole way through, went great. Selling merch after, and they all like, some people buy some stuff, but they pretty much just kind of run right out of the room.
Okay.
The late show was kind of a weird one. Like I was burnt out from doing all the shows. I kind of went off the script a bunch, talked to the crowd a little bit more, riffed. There were like some weird, awkward moments, but then got back on track. And overall, it was like fun. But there were real moments, and the vibe was like, at moments I was like, I don't know what's happening. But like we connected more. Afterwards, I sold twice the amount of merch than I sold in the first show, because people want that genuine experience. They don't want someone to just come out and like be like, here are the jokes, they want the moments.
The moment.
It's about the fat.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you cut all the fat off of something, it's just a joke, and then you don't need to be there. They could have read the tweet.
That's why they pay to see it live in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think crowd work is like, it's an interesting thing because it takes a long time to master, and it takes a lot of failing. And also, you kind of got to see a lot of good people do it first to be like, oh, that's how it works. Like, I'm very lucky. I got to follow around Big Jay Oakerson in New York City when I was very young at comedy. And Jay's like one of the best in the world at crowd work. And that was before every single person was putting up crowd work clips and talking to the crowd all the time. Like 12 years before that, you know? He was just in like New York City jiu-jitsuing it. And you're just like, this is incredible. And so I kind of like got to watch a match. You know, there's a really good book called The Inner Game of Tennis. That's about how you learn how to play tennis, but it's really just a book about how you learn to do anything at like a professional level. And it's a really good book. And they talk about how really one of the best ways to watch isn't to someone to tell you how to do a thing. It's to just go watch somebody good at it. And I did a lot of that in my like early years of stand-up. I just went and watched a lot of stand-up. You know, I just went to a ton of shows in New York City and watched really good people. And was kind of Big Jay's shadow for a while. That's
really fortunate. I think one of the things we lack maybe in the European scene is we don't have that many professionals. I'm not saying we don't have any, but not that many. So it's hard.
Well, the scene's younger. So like in Paris, I think the comic who's been doing it the longest is probably 5 to 7 years, right?
How long is Sebastian Marx doing comedy?
Oh, yeah, Sebastian maybe a little bit longer, but yeah.
Yeah, I think
Sebastian's also doing it in French too, which like, you know, you have to speak French to get it. But like, if you go to England, you can see tons of great pro comics.
That's the thing.
You just got to find those cheap channel tickets.
It's true that when you're in a new comic, you're not comfortable with crowd work, and with time you get more comfortable, and you have to fail a lot. Yeah. And it's good to see how the professionals do it. But when would you say it's a good time to start at least trying a bit? Because you have to...
When you feel comfortable yourself on stage.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like until you're like, feel like you have a grasp of like what you're doing technically, I think it's kind of tough. But also if there's like an elephant in the room, the easiest way to do it, start doing it is by addressing it. But unless there's like, if you don't actually have something like, you have to find the people you're talking to interesting. And I think that's one of the huge problems. Like the comics are just like, when you're young in comedy, you see people try to do crowd work and they don't actually like, it's almost like they're not paying attention to the people. Yeah. They're just like looking for a thing to say a joke about. So you hear a lot of the same like hacky crowd work jokes versus like actually asking questions about the person. Because if you ask questions about the people, inherently 99% of people are pretty interesting. You can find something interesting and it's like, you give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves. Like you'll find a funny thing from it. You just got to trust that something funny is going to come. Be patient and curious.
Is there something that you would like to share that they haven't asked?
I think the most important things are like, no, it's going to take longer than you expect it to take. Mm-hmm. Take time to write and take time to like listen. And also don't feel like you have to start putting stuff on the internet immediately. Because I feel like a lot of comics rush to like putting stuff up. And it's like, you don't know how to do comedy yet. Why are you putting up your open mic set? You know? Try to keep it as fun as long as possible. Because when it becomes your full-time job, it adds a level of stress that wasn't there previously. You know? That can take some of the fun out of it.
What happens if you're in a stress time, or not because of comedy, maybe you're in a dark period for other reasons?
Comedy is usually the thing that I can go to that snaps me out of it.
It snaps you out of it.
Or I'll just like talk about it on stage and it'll be like cathartic and funny. Like I'm very much like, if I'm having a bad day, I'll tell the audience I'm having a bad day and talk about it. I'm not like I got to put on the face, you know? It's like, I'll try to have those real moments. Like, you know, if there's a difficult thing going on in my life, I'll try to suss it out and talk about it on stage because it is eventually going to end up in my act.
Yeah.
You know? So I don't like wait 6 months to talk about how I'm sad or like going through a breakup. It's like, no, I'm going through a breakup right now. So you guys are going to hear about it. I'm sad.
I'm sad. I'm having a panic attack.
I've done all that stuff. Yeah. And like, that's interesting stuff. That's also human stuff. And that's the thing audiences connect to, because I don't know anyone outside of like weird Christian people who've been together their whole lives, people who haven't been through like a breakup.
Yes, it's very relatable.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also like talking very bluntly, most people don't speak honestly. Most people try to like people please and like soft shoe things. So like if there's two 20-year-olds in my crowd and they're talking about how they're about to break up because one of them's moving halfway around the world, I have enough experience in life to tell them, be like, it's okay, because it wouldn't have worked out anyway. You're 20. You know what I mean? Like 20, when you're, the relationship you're in when you're 20 isn't going to be the relationship you're in when you're 40. So it's like, just take this for the learning experience it is, and like have fun with each other and let that be the thing. And then you can be sad about it and realize that you can still be sad and it's not the end of the world. Specificity kills ambiguity.
Yeah.
The comedy is a sport about comedy is an art form about being very direct, because most people aren't. And usually the funniest thing is the thing that is the most true that people aren't talking about or didn't notice. So it's like those two things that you have to like, that you have to talk about.
I agree.
And most people avoid most conversations in life.
And then they go to a comedy show and they're like, we want to hear the things
that we're not talking about.
I was going to ask what is funny, but I think you kind of covered it.
What's funny?
What is funny?
I think truthful stuff is just funny. And sometimes just silly, dumb stuff is really funny to me. Like there's all these memes going around about Trump's vice president pick fucking a couch.
Yes.
And it's fucking so funny. And watching like everyone on the right is just having a blast with it, and watching the people on the left like freak out like this is a conspiracy created by the Democrats. And it's like, no, it was one troll on Twitter tweeted, and everyone's just like, hey, seems like a guy who would fuck a couch. And that's just super funny.
Yeah.
And seeing the memes, because that's the thing. It isn't true, but there is something about it that you're like, I could see that. And that's what makes it funny.
What JF stands for?
He asked what JF stands for. It stands for James Francis. But when I started in stand-up, there were 3 other James Harrises doing stand-up.
Okay.
And there was a guy who worked in the industry who told me I had to change my name, who I probably didn't need to listen to because all the other James Harrises stopped doing stand-up.
Do you think like comedians should change their names if they're, for example, difficult to pronounce?
I don't think so. I think it's like part of who you are. Yeah. I wouldn't. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of comedians with difficult names. I mean, Mike Birbiglia is like Zach Galifianakis. Like those are all, you know.
Yeah. So, okay, we keep...
Not traditional.
Yeah, and you keep...
Like, or not traditional, but they're not like as common.
It makes the life of them seem a bit harder to pronounce, but it's okay.
Yeah, yeah. I know so many comics. I mean, it's also funny because there is like a young comedian thing, especially in the States, where a lot of them have that's okay, they couldn't say my name right. I've been called this, and that. There's like, I've heard that joke a lot. You want to know what one big difference is here? The way the host brings the comedians up.
Okay.
They bring comics up different here.
Oh.
Yeah, they'll say like, we're going to bring up, here people will be like, we're going to bring up and say the comic's name and then talk a little bit more. In America, they say your next comedian you may have seen on Comedy Central. You may have seen him on Bill Burr's The Ringers. Please welcome to the stage, JF Harris. Where here we'll be like, our next comedian is JF Harris. So everyone make some noise for JF Harris. Where it's like, in America, they do like a much shorter, just like, these are the things. Very funny comic visiting us from out of town. You guys are going to love him. Please welcome Tom Henry, you know? Where here, I feel like in Europe, everyone like does like they say the name first. And it's funny. I don't get it. I don't know why. They like say the name and then say some stuff and then say like, okay, welcome them, you know? Where it's like, it doesn't build in the same way. Like in America, it builds towards like, welcome, name, you know? Where here they do like, let me say the person's name, say a little something, saying, so, okay, here they come. and then gets people clapping, you know? That's like the one thing, and that's like universal across Europe.
Across Europe.
It happens. England too. Unless it's like the only time in England I ever see it happen where they say the comedian's names last is if it's like a special guest. Like I was doing shows with Russell Howard like a week or two ago, and everyone was like, they were like, we got a special guest, blah, 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 blah. You may have seen him on this, Russell Howard. That's the only time.
Yeah.
And in America, they really train the host young because they like, oh, that's another difference. Like in the UK, the host is like a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like usually here, like the host is the person whose show it is. So it's like a bit more of a like, I'm hosting. Or if it's like Victor's doing an hour and a half show, Victor hosts, then he'll have a guest, then Victor will come back out and do an hour. Where like in America, usually the host, outside of like New York, like is usually the least experienced on the show.
Really?
It's usually like a local comedian will host and do 10 minutes at the top. Then there'll be a feature comedian who does like 25 minutes and then a headliner who does like an hour. I think that is actually a better way to do it. Like Canada does a similar thing where like the host is usually a more experienced person and then the feature spot's usually a little less experienced and then the headliner's the most experienced. But the host, because they kind of came similar from the like English system, because the host sets the tone for the show.
Exactly. Because like if the audience doesn't like them, it's a problem.
Yeah, because they're stuck with them for the night. But like the Cellar, Comedy Cellar in New York, like the host is a big deal. It's usually somebody who's like a very good host, seasoned with like real chops.
Okay, that makes sense.
And usually people with like high energy and stuff like that. And the host makes more money than the other comics because they have to stay there all night. So they can't go do like 3 or 4 spots. But it's also nice because you get paid a little more.
All right. So when do we see your special?
Anyone can go online and watch it right now. It's called J.F. Harris, People Make Mistakes. And if they just Google it, it'll pop right up.
It's a sign.
The neighbor upstairs has a very intense vibrator going on.
Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
See you. We'll have you on another one.
Sweet. Can't wait. Thanks, gang.